This is the Q&A for session 2 for reassessing singleness and assessing maturity. And you guys have turned in questions that I'm now looking at for the first time and seeing which ones you have voted on. Apparently a question that was asked a week ago got a lot of votes and is still there. The tallies are coming in. I'll do my best to answer these. All right. Question that's being asked here is, when is the best time in a relationship to talk about past experiences you're very ashamed of? It's a great question. And I really appreciate this because the question is expressing the desire for honesty and transparency, and I commend that. And so I just want to say at the very beginning how much I appreciate that. However, I think we'd have to ask the question, what is it that information being communicated when it is, what's being expected of the person that it's being shared with? In other words, is it being shared with so that the person who learns of it might have more context for you, an understanding of who you are, and that help them make a more involved decision on whether or not to continue a relationship with you? Well, there are a lot of things that people eventually learn about your relationship, like your relationship with your family, your view of children, if you even want to have children, if you were married. That these things are not necessarily coming out in the very beginning, early weeks of dating. The other aspect, to get to the more specific question I want to address here, is what is it that you're hoping the person to do with that information by responding to you? I do think sometimes there can be a expectation of an individual you're dating that if they learn something about you, that they can help you with it. And sometimes that expectation might be inappropriate if this is the first time they've dealt with somebody who's gone through that type of experience. They might feel very unprepared. Outside of expressing sympathy for you and really care and compassion towards you, they might not know what to do with that. Their lack of knowing what to do with it should not be equated as they don't care about you and that you went through that experience. They actually might need to sort of learn what to do to help somebody in that situation. But another challenge here is sometimes what will happen is some people in a relationship will surprisingly tell a person they're dating very early in the relationship everything about them, which seems disorienting to some people. Like, why would you do that? Like, they're just getting to know each other. Why would you sort of tell them all these dark secrets about you? Because oftentimes what a person's doing in that context is they're basically trying to speed date and say, if you learned of something about me later that you wished you knew now that would make you make a decision, let me go and tell you everything there's about me. That way, if you reject me, I don't have to get my hopes up and you'll go ahead and just reject me now as opposed to like 6 months from now. Now, that can initially appear to be commendable because it looks like it's just really trustworthy and really honest. But it actually can be a form of selfishness and or laziness because of the desire, I don't want to have to work at this relationship, which would be the issue of laziness, or selfishness. I don't want to have to be inconvenienced by the time I commit to this. Otherwise, if I just knew everything, I could just kind of decide it now. And so I think in this kind of context, as you can tell by the answer to this question I'm giving, it's very complicated because there's a lot of context in which it should work out. I will say this. It is my wife's and my counsel to any Christian man and Christian woman who are in a dating relationship that they should be simultaneously in a discipleship relationship with another older man and woman who is discipling them independent from each other, so that they have a mature Christian in their life to help them navigate the specifics of endless amounts of variables. What about this? What about this? What about this? What about this? There's somebody who knows the Word of God, who loves you and cares for you, who can help you sort of answer these questions with specificity as to timing and sequence and response in a way that maybe otherwise you just have never had. And I do find a lot of people date without any ongoing accountability and counsel from older people in their life, which I think is common but unfortunate. Because you could always be spared a lot of headache and a lot of sort of missteps if you just had someone sort of walk you through that. All right. Next question. How do you let a guy know that you're interested? That's a great question, and I appreciate that because I do think, kind of related back to what we spoke about last week, there is a challenge in relationships between men and women, particularly if a woman is really wanting the man to be able to take responsibility for initiation and for communication and for the expression of kind of leading in that respect. How can a woman let a man know that? Well, to sort of speak to the obvious answer first, let's not approach it through the junior high route, which is to make fun of them and tease them and jab them and kind of mock them, which is some type of weird passive aggressive way that sometimes girls actually communicate to guys they like them is like they pick on them. So let's be a little bit more mature, and instead I would say letting a guy know they're interested should not have to necessarily be the determiner by which a guy is going to communicate his interest in you. In other words, what you want to be careful in is not trying to figure out, you've got to put out all of your signals to let a person know that you're available and interested, and hopefully they're picking up what you're putting down, and you're vibing, and you hope you're on the same frequency. But instead to say, what you want to be careful with is saying, are you living godly before the Lord? And is that attractive to that guy? Or does he need you to take on a flirtatious role that's like a low-key type of flirtatiousness, but not so immoral that you don't have to feel like you're that bad, in a way that's actually attracting him with the wrong things? And so what I'm saying is, personal interaction with another guy, capable in conversation, expressing interest in the individual, communicating your love for the Lord, your desire to serve in the church, your desire to care for people and spend time in relationships with each other, that should be attractive. That should be something which a person sees that and is interested in that. And we'll speak more specifically to this next week. I'm going to have my wife be involved with me in the Q&A. We're talking about dating, specifically how to pursue, what are the different stages of dating, how do you know if you're going to be getting married, what does that look like? We'll talk all about that for our lock-in next week. All right, next question here. They keep jumping up here. What is the value, if any, of sharing all of your past sexual transgressions with your future partner before marriage? Is it important to go into detail? This is a great question, and one that we often deal with in premarital counseling. A lot of people come into marriage not only not being virgins because of just how common sexual promiscuity is today, and even for some people just being involved in relationships as non-Christians in a number of ways before they give their lives to Christ, and they're wondering, how much are they supposed to tell? Here's the thing we want to be clear on. Details do not help the conversation, do not help the relationship advance. So in other words, what we typically find, my wife and I in conversation with couples, it can go either way. Sometimes I would say probably statistically, you can confirm or deny this, Danelle, but more often than not, the woman in the relationship will be more interested to know the details of the man's previous sexual relationship in a way that not necessarily as commonly the man would want to know about the woman. But we basically have to kind of think of this in categories. Number one is the sort of a basic category is this kind of understanding of sexual intimacy. Is this something that you've already been a part of in somebody else's life and somebody else has been a part of in your life? It's a fancy way of saying, are you a virgin or not? Now, that's not trying to put scarlet letter in anybody. It's just sort of a clear kind of understanding of like what it has looked like for you. Some people have come out of different kind of relationships and same-sex relationships. And that kind of dynamic background or that kind of background where there's like, listen, this is very new for me. Even my own allegiance to Christ is sort of reorienting my affections, and even that is sometimes a struggle for me as I think through that. So it's not just maybe that I have been with somebody of the opposite sex. Sometimes I've been with people of the same sex. And how do I work through that kind of history and talk through that? I think the question is to say, number one, in category number one is, has the person been involved with somebody else previously sexually? Number two is the next category, which is there been any other sexual experience with those individual or individuals that has been really destructive or damaging? So, for example, my wife, I've done counseling with women who have been raped before, people who've been sexually abused before, and that has just created a great amount of understandable self-preservation and distrust in a way that can certainly, God can do amazingly redemptive things and give lots of hope there, but it can take some work. And a person needs to understand that as a point of care and compassion. And it would not be inappropriate if that was true, if you asked your boyfriend, you asked your girlfriend, again, assuming the opposite sex relationship here, if you ask them to say, hey, this has been a struggle, and honestly, I'm still working through this right now, and I think it'd be really helpful if you could even understand this better, and here's maybe a resource to read, or here's a conversation you could have. It doesn't have to just be me. I also think the question is about detail. Sometimes we'll find that people want to know details, which is actually just going to be used by Satan to really affect how a person thinks wrongly. It's not uncommon to have married couples be married to one another, surprisingly, as I said before, having been sexually involved in relationships prior to their marriage. In some moment, something triggers them, and they freak out sexually. Lock themselves in the bathroom on their honeymoon. What was supposed to be an amazing night turns out to be not a good night at all. Call my wife on the phone if it's a woman. I cannot do this. I do not want to do this. Want to sleep in another bedroom. Not want to get undressed if the light's on or the light's off. Because for them, all of a sudden, all these memories are coming back, and it's so difficult for them to overcome that now of what was supposed to be the most sweet, intimate moment that this couple has enjoyed exclusively together has now become the hardest day of their life. And the question you have to ask is, if I learned something about you, what would I learn that would make me not love you again? You should not answer that question with, well, I would learn this, I would not want to love you then. But to say, if you loved me, would you be patient with me in this process that it will take? So I think we have to go into these kind of relationships with an understanding of how we have to be patient and gentle and kind with each other. And I'm sure right now my own wife is thinking that there's probably more things I could say to this, but we could get to that next week perhaps. How to tell if you have the gift of singleness or just avoiding commitment. I think kind of using the assessment I gave earlier in the notes, which I'll just review that briefly for you, as far as how would you understand that. The gift of singleness has the three features: spiritually motivated, able to live in a self-controlled life sexually, meaning you're not giving yourself to sexual passions, that's not something that's dominating you by desire, and you live with contentment in your singleness. If that's not true, then I would say, then you not wanting to be married is not because you're trying to pursue the gift of singleness, it's because you are having problems of commitment. And honestly, commitment is a demonstration of maturity. And I do find singles struggle with commitment. They struggle with commitment to jobs. They struggle with commitment to housing contracts. They struggle with commitment to leasing contracts with their cars. They struggle with commitment to hobbies that they pursue. They struggle with commitment to reading plans of the Bible. They struggle with commitment to churches. They struggle with commitment to friendships. They just struggle with commitment. And it's a practice of perpetual immaturity that somehow in the past you were doing and practicing without accountability to pull you back. I mean, when you commit in marriage, you're basically saying, if you're a man, I just told all the women on the planet, I'm done. I'm unavailable for the rest of my life. I'm now committed. And some people, that terrifies you because why? Because the world says, how do you know? How do you know? You got to drive that car before you buy it. So you got to have sex. Because you can't find relational compatibility without a lot of sex. Christians sometimes can morally clean that up. Well, they don't necessarily advocate for lots of sex or any sex. They advocate for lots of relationships. because they're living for fear around the idea that they're looking for the one around the corner that they don't want to miss. And that's just a sign of immaturity. Now, I'm not saying you should be reckless with your decision. I'm not saying you should be like, well, he's a guy, I'm a girl, he says he loves Jesus, is there a pastor in the building? Let's do this. Not advocating for that. I'm saying, though, that this could be a problem, and I appreciate the question. When to talk about marriage when you're dating? Interestingly, I think you should talk about marriage when you're dating very early on, but not about your marriage. I think you should talk about marriage very early on when you're dating, but not necessarily about your marriage to come. The reason why is because you want them to understand you're trying to practice something that's countercultural. You're trying not to get involved in recreational dating as a means to fight off loneliness, to curb your discontentment, or to maybe play with your sexual desires. As long as you don't do maybe intercourse, you'll be okay. But instead, you want to recognize from the beginning, listen, I'm not trying to play with your life or waste your time. And so this is meaningful to me. Now, we're still getting to know each other. And I'm not saying we're talking about us getting married, but I'm saying I just want you to know that this bus is headed to a destination. At any point you decide you want to get off, or I want to get off, we'll leave it to the Lord. May God give us wisdom, may God give us godly counselors to help us. Now, the question I imagine is being asked here is, how soon do you talk about the two of you getting married when you're dating? Well, I would recommend to you to email me, Eric at Grace Church. I mean this sincerely, Eric at gracechurch.miami, because I can email you a list of questions that I give to dating couples who are serious to talk about even before they get engaged. Because I'm concerned that once a couple gets engaged, I kind of lose their attention. Because they're thinking about a wedding. And they're thinking about dresses, and they're thinking about flowers, and they're thinking about contracts, and they're thinking all that kind of stuff. That's usually not the time you want to start thinking seriously about marriage. So the question is going back to, like, when should I start talking about marriage? Well, I think you should not talk about it so soon. Like, you're like, hey, you know, my name's Eric, and what are you doing in 4 months? That's probably enough time to get to know you and marry you. Yeah, that's going to be a bit creepish. But instead, I do think there's a place where we've got counsel in your life. You got these questions you're kind of thinking through. Do we have kind of agreed areas of where we're headed and what we want to do to say, man, what would it look like to be together in marriage? I'm really interested in this conversation. Now, some people, because of commitment problems, would like panic when you do that. Don't worry. When I started dating my wife, I broke up with her a week later because I panicked. Because we were already friends for a year, like really good friends. So close, people thought we're dating, and we were not. There was nothing left I had to learn about this woman while I was going to start dating her. And I knew where dating goes. You either marry him or you break up with them. There's only two options. So I was like, oh no, I panicked because I didn't want to commit. I wasn't sure I was ready, mature enough. I wasn't sure we were ready. I thought all these kind of benchmarks I had to have. And so I had to grow up a little bit. And I think sometimes talking about marriage, just the exercise itself can be a grow-up exercise. So you've made someone an idol. Now what? How do you backtrack and correct your center of attention? I think first of all, you just tell the Lord that you're sorry. Repent to the Lord. Thank God for the gift he gave you, but ask for his forgiveness in that you took the gift and made it a God in your life. Begin to put accountability in your life with other people who know that this is true with you, and then you can hold you accountable by asking how that's going. I think also to replace the idol with a love for the Lord, to return to the love for the Lord in ways that maybe you're serving him in ways you're not now. You're concerned about him in ways you're not now, thinking about him in ways you're not now, praying to him in ways that you're not now, in a way that would really help audit and correct where those allegiances are being spent. All right, so then I'm not just playing favorites here. Let's go to the very bottom. How do you overcome struggle of commitment? It's a good question, and I appreciate the question. I think sometimes struggle of commitment can be tied to different reasons. For some people, they don't commit, for example, to a church because they don't trust authority because they've had bad experiences with it. Well, in that situation, when I'm aware of that, I want to be very patient with that individual. In the context of a relationship, it can be the same way. People can struggle with commitment because they've been hurt before. They're trying to preserve themselves. It's an understandable exercise. Not to say excusable, but it's an understandable exercise that people do. Other times people struggle with commitment because they honestly are really having a hard time giving up their autonomy. They believe in sort of this fallacy that independence is the best way to live. That's just not true. We're always in the context of community, whether it's exclusive in the context of a relationship of marriage or in the context of brothers and sisters in the body of Christ. We're always in the context of relationship. So this idea here of struggling with commitment is a question of what is the reason for that struggle. For sometimes that sort of idleness, that sort of is an issue of immaturity. I want to be very patient. Other times it's an issue of ungodliness. It needs to be addressed. So when I say the word struggle, sometimes we just mean the word sin. I'm struggling with pride. So you're sinning in pride. No, I don't mean to in any way malign somebody here, but struggle can sometimes mean having a hard time following through, keeping a commitment to something. I'm saying Jesus says very clearly, let your yes be yes and your no be a no. We are known for being people of the word who speak honestly the word. So sometimes it's making small commitments where you're going to be, that you show up, what you're going to do, that you do. And sometimes it's just putting yourself in a place where you have to make commitment. Serve in the church. Be dependable. Be trustworthy. Offer to serve people. Bring dinner over to their house. Bring appetizers. Bring chips. Bring drinks. Hey, we're going to do this again next week. Can I pick up water for the group? Can I bring ice for the group? Can I help come set up chairs? Find ways in which you're not known for committing and practice small steps of commitment. Because if you think you can go from I'm not known for commitment to I can get married, you're just really fooling yourself. We want to take some small steps in that respect. All right, another question from the bottom. How do I know whether or not I'm idolizing my independency or if I'm just content in my singleness? I hope I've addressed that enough, but if not, from my earlier questions, you can just have me follow up with you personally. You can, ask on behalf of your friend. That's totally legitimate. My friend wanted me to come up and ask you. Should I talk to a guy who was more immature than me? Well, that's a good question. I mean, if you kind of go back to this idea of immaturity, more immature than you, it's a bit of a difficult kind of categorical consideration. More immature in what way? More immature conversationally, they just don't really carry the conversation that well? Well, that could be a concern, especially if you want him to lead at all in relationships and spiritual things. Maybe immature financially, that he's just sort of known for sort of being impulsive. He sees it, he buys it, he thinks later, where am I going to get the money for that? I think it sort of depends on the category of that. So I don't necessarily think you should not, first of all, the idea of talking, I'm assuming this context means kind of express some relational interest here. But I do say you really want to have godly men that you have as brothers in Christ who are pouring into the lives around them and themselves are encouraging each other. Kind of in that proverbial way, as Proverbs says, as iron sharpens iron, so a man sharpens another. I do think, though, a lot of times in the church, there can be areas of immaturity in men's lives that the world has continued to proliferate in their lives and not really hold them accountable to, and women are often frustrated. If you take an average viewing of an average TV sitcom, movie, type of representation, men are typically seen as the cartoon buffoonery. They're just morons. They're kind of the punching joke for everything. They kind of just, they're known for not being taken seriously. They're not responsible. They're quick with the joke. They like sports. They don't know how to do conversations. So men, you are sort of having a script written for you by the society, and too often you're going along with it. And I'm saying for your ability to think responsibly, to communicate maturely, to think of others. I tried to give you a vision last week of how men and women could serve each other. Man, that would show unbelievable maturity. All right, a few more, and I obviously can't get to all of these. I'm just trying to cover them as briefly as I can. So more could be said in each one of these. Okay, the question is asked at the top, what does guarding your heart mean? I hear this all the time when giving advice on dating and getting to know someone. It's a great question. I appreciate that because sometimes Christians can use phrases and language. Everyone's like, what are we talking about here? Is it just me? I don't know what we're talking about. Guarding your heart. Is it like a prison guard who's like, don't hurt his heart? What's happening? Guarding your heart has become like this euphemistic phrase to say, what is it that drives you? It connects back to the ideas of idols. So John Calvin said that our hearts are idol factories, always producing something else as a greater allegiance to the Lord. So guarding your heart is being introspectively, maturely self-aware that you think about what you're thinking. You think about what you're doing. And you ask questions. Why did I say that? Why did I do that? What am I wanting from this? So let's be very specific. There you are. You're circled up with some guys and girls. You're having a conversation, and you have this outer body moment where you're like listening to yourself talk, or after the fact, and you're like, man, that just was so not me. Or in the moment, you can kind of catch yourself like kind of trying to present yourself to be somebody that you're not. Well, what's happening right now in that moment is either out of a fear of man, what will people think of you, or out of pride, trying to make yourself bigger than you actually are, kind of what we talk about in our Wednesday night community groups if you're with us at a church. You're pretending to be somebody you're not. So guarding your heart is to take the Bible and to continually informing your mind, so your conscience is being continually informed as to what is actually true versus actually maybe what you're doing by contrast. So guarding your heart is just being careful there. So putting it in a relational context, guarding your heart is like, hey, to not have anything have great allegiance to the Lord. So guarding your heart can mean something as basic as like, I don't want this guy or this girl to become so overwhelming to me that if they were to break up with me, I could not imagine living. Some people become suicidal after their relationships end. Contentment, I don't know how I'm going to go on and be happy. I cannot imagine singleness as an opportunity to live when I thought I had a relationship right here on the line. Guarding your heart, keeping that from happening. All right, maybe one more. Okay. I'm divorced and I want to be married. However, I fear being married again. And I truly enjoy my singleness. How should I navigate through this? This is a great question because I think it thinks for the reality of the church. The church is filled with people, has a number of people in our church, as us as members, who have been married before. And the question is, how should I think through that? I want to be married again. I think to summarize my answer just briefly for you is to say, first of all, we have to look back at your divorce that you already had. What was the nature of that divorce? Were you a Christian? Were you not a Christian? What were the terms by which that divorce came to pass? So I think I just want to kind of be very slow to just say, well, whatever happened is sort of in the past. Well, let's just sort of stop in the same way that Paul is talking in 1 Corinthians 7 to kind of take a careful look at your previous divorce as to how did that happen? Not only because we want to understand it biblically, but we also want to learn from it presently. What decisions were made there? What have we learned from those decisions? The question about fearing being married again can come from a number of sources. Sometimes fear of being married again is because you were abused and you do not want to be abused again. You never went into marriage thinking you're going to be abused, but you learned that once you got in the relationship because of how they treated you. Sometimes being married again means you're fearing it because of being let down and disappointed. That what started off strong ended. So I think the question is, kind of back to this nature of fear, what is driving that fear? A lot of times fear imagines a future of problems, but without a God in the future to help you with those problems. And that's a huge challenge for us as Christians. Imagining a future without a God. We are futuristic atheists. And that's a huge problem. It drives us. We can get to the point of anxiety and worry, and it just overwhelms our decision-making today. So I think with the other comments being noted about how the relationship was done, how the divorce was done, and I'd have to talk to you about that more individually as a pastor to kind of better understand it. We can also answer the question of then what we have learned from that previous relationship. Last part you've said here is about, I truly enjoy your singleness. How should I navigate this? Well, enjoying singleness, and then you have this question, I also want to be married. And I would want to talk through this with you as to say, why is it that you want to be married? Is it for the sake of companionship, and you think that's the only way you can accomplish it in the context of marriage? Is it because of sexual desire, and that's still a continuing struggle for you, having now been divorced, and you still want to be able to have an outlet for that in the context of marriage? Or is it for some other reason, financial or otherwise? Having appreciated marriage, having been married before. To enjoy your singleness does not necessarily mean that God's given you the gift of singleness. That could just mean commendably, you're doing well at honoring the Lord and being content. And I mean to affirm that in you, if that's what's happening. But sometimes enjoying singleness can mean you're doing well at being selfish and just sort of enjoying your autonomy. I don't have to ask anybody what we're going to eat tonight for dinner. Whatever I want to eat, we're eating. Me, myself, and I, the unholy trinity. So I mean this not in any way to make light of the question, as if to imply that you've got sinful desires here. I mean this to sort of say, you could just see by the different variety of answers I give it, how it's kind of a very complicated scenario I'd want to sort of drill in. And just understand pastorally, while we're doing public Q&As, I'm more than happy to do private conversations with you. Sort of address specific situation you're thinking through and facing.